Okay, so I'm going to let you get your breath back and start with a few questions and then hand it over to you guys. Michael, okay, so you grew up in Jersey, and this is somewhat related to a kind of true story. Can you talk about the origins and the start of your development of this film?
There was a true case from Jersey. There was a guy called the Beast of Jersey, and in the 1960s he was a kind of sex attacker. He actually didn't kill anyone, but he kind of terrorized the island for that 10-year period. And even when I was growing up in the 80s, he was still a kind of spectre that haunted the island. He almost became part of the folklore for us growing up as kids. And I found it so incongruous how horrific those crimes were against my experience of growing up on the island, which was effectively, quite idyllic, and it was quite, a beautiful island growing up in, and it felt quite safe. And so I didn't want to do a film that was specifically based on that case and was going to be a period detailed reconstruction of those events, but I wanted to take that sort of duality and then explore a story which kind of had my impressions of that. So and looking at it from the island's point of view, and also from the point of view of a family that seems quite wholesome from the exterior, but behind the curtain was quite a hostile environment, and a character that seemed kind of innocent in some ways, whereas actually they might have had some problems lurking under the surface. So it was riffing off a true story, but then writing something original that was a kind of fairy tale that kind of had that aspect to it.
And Ivanna, it's a real kind of mix of genres. You've got that kind of dreamy fairy tale quality. It's also a thriller and a romance. I'm wondering, when you first started talking to collaborators and financiers, how are you describing the film? How are you pitching it?
It's a really good question. I think probably the story and the way we pitched it has changed slightly through the process, in that you probably pitch it to financiers in a slightly different way to what the story might end up as, but we always did want this to be a story that incorporated different tones and different genres, and that had different qualities, and that felt slightly different. I just say different a million times. But that was quite bold in its kind of approach, and tried to speak to an audience and tried to incorporate some elements of the kind of police procedural and the slightly more thriller sensibilities, while still being 100% seen through the eyes of this kind of incredible character and very much based in drama and emotion.
And Jessie, it's an incredible performance. It's a very raw role. I'm wondering, what excited you when you first kind of came to the material?
Well, that very thing of it being so raw, and I suppose to see an anti-heroine who's an outcast, and her vulnerability was something which I felt scared of and enticed by, and emotionally just kind of catapulted me into a place of a reaction to the script. And she, it's her vulnerability that is what drew me, and I think she comes out of it not as a victim but as somebody who I learned from, and the fact that she faces those vulnerabilities and questions what the moral compass of society is and what it is to be good or evil. Those are all the things that made me want to do it. Also, it's just bloody good, so...
Well, it's also very rare in that it's a British film that's pretty sexy. And I wondered, Michael, if you could talk about the kind of the chemistry and how you kind of, how you captured that. And I guess that's to do with the casting as well.
Yeah, in some ways, you can be it can be scary when you're doing a love story and you're casting roles, and of course there's that question of chemistry and whether the actors are going to get along. In some ways that concern was sort of taken away when I met Jessie and Johnny, not by seeing them together, though we did do a chemistry read, but just because on a personal level I got them and I thought they were very grounded and empathetic people, and so that kind of, in some ways it took care of itself. And I think we did one chemistry read, but that can also feel quite forced, and it puts a lot of pressure on an actor to come into a room and go, oh, I've really got to get along with this guy now. Otherwise they're not, it's somehow not going to work. But that it felt quite natural in a way. It's not like we wanted to push any hyper-sexual element onto the film. It was a love story that was supposed to be emotionally grounded rather than one that was like purely sensual. And when we turned over on the first few scenes with Jessie and Johnny, and I got to see them, when we were rehearsing, it was quite effortless, which made my job really easy because I could just be a sort of witness to that, and we could just kind of observe it, and then try and capture some of the detail of it, whether that was the tactile quality of, and there was something that was quite physical between them, but I didn't want to do something that felt really forced. Hopefully it was coming from performance.
And those characters, I think, for me, in preparing, they exist on such a pure animalistic level, and that's what is kind of explosive between them from the first time they see each other, is that they kind of meet each other and see there's something unconservative or unbounded by society within them that they both lance out, and once that blister has been lanced and the love comes out of that, that's when anything is possible.
Well, you mentioned the kind of tactile qualities, and it's incredibly cinematic as a film. I'm wondering, when you were first deciding on the kind of mood of it and having conversations with your cinematographer, what were your kind of reference points kind of coming into it?
We knew we wanted to do something that felt quite different to a lot of British cinema. I mean, we've got a great legacy of sort of British horror films that are very, that are quite gothic and moody, and crime films that are quite, they always seem quite dark, and it's always raining, and there's a gloominess to it, and in some ways that's quite rich. And we were just thinking, how do we circumvent that, because that feels quite familiar. And then by virtue of it being set on Jersey, that gave another aspect. And then the conversations are really about trying to create two different worlds. One where Moll is sort of trapped or suffocated within an environment is quite hostile to her, and the camera there is much more deliberate and focused and paced. And then the scenes when she's with Pascal are more the handheld, and that affects lots of aspects of the filmmaking. The editing becomes more impressionistic there, and it felt somewhere that was more of a natural space for the character. There's a point in the film where we switch and it becomes much more deliberate again. So that was a big aspect. And then with all of the HODs, costume designer and production designer, we wanted to create an atmosphere that didn't feel contemporary. And it felt more like more timeless, and a space where the kind of fairy tale or fable quality of the film could resonate from.
Excellent. And Ivanna, what were the, pleasures and challenges of shooting on an island?
We only shot 1 week on Jersey, so we shot 4 weeks in Surrey, which matched almost perfectly for Jersey. And then we shot 1 week on Jersey, and the landscapes there are just absolutely beautiful. And interestingly, to your point about kind of the period setting, I remember turning up on set the first day in Moll's house, and our brilliant production designer who's here, Laura, had put one of those phones, which the old kind of roto phones in. And I was like, well, this is just like the 70s. I mean, we can't have this phone because it'll feel too period. And we got into Jersey, and we got into the hotel that we were staying in, and the hotel had those phones. I was like, oh, right, okay. It is actually the 70s there. So Jersey's just kind of amazing. Like, everything looks like a film set. But obviously there's the challenges with shooting somewhere where there isn't a film infrastructure, which created some kind of exciting days.
All right, do we have some questions from the audience? Please raise your hands. Are you all still stunned? This is the European premiere, so it'd be wonderful to hear some responses. Here we go.
First, that is an outstanding first feature, so congratulations. I'm just really curious, because it's a first feature as a director and a first as an actor. Can you talk a bit about the pros and cons about that process, about how it was beneficial and other times it was nerve-wracking, being together and doing something new, kind of the partnership?
It felt more like there was positives from that aspect, because we had so much to gain from it. It's your first film, and so you're going to put everything into it, and not that, you know, experienced actors can sort of phone it in, but it's, I mean, that does definitely happen. But there was something on the first few days of filming where sort of Jessie was so, committed and brave, and because she had so much invested into it, it set the bar really high for everyone on set, including me, because I thought, fuck, she gives this much of a shit. Like, we all have to sustain this energy and focus. So in a way, that kind of commitment and that kind of, that investment of it's the first feature, so much rides on this. It kind of engenders like quite a powerful momentum and belief in the film. In some ways as well, like you're quite green to a lot of, you can be sort of naive to some of the challenges, which makes you a bit more punk in the making of it, and you kind of roll with it, and you have a sort of don't give a fuck attitude, and that it gives you some extra energy. So I don't know. We had a lot of our HODs have made a few films, and they're friends of mine, but they're just more experienced than me. So I could kind of rely on their experience a bit in the making, and it allowed me and sort of Jessie as well just to keep run at 100 miles an hour, because we were just so keen to make it as good as we could.
It was a complete joy, and it's exactly how I want to continue to work. And I think you can become complacent the more you do. And I always want to go back to that place where you are as a child in your rawest form, where you don't know what's going to happen. And when you're working together and collaborating together and opening up dialogue of what is possible in order to evolve storytelling in whatever is unique to what's going on between you is a complete and utter joy. And Michael is such, from having read the script and seeing a vision which felt incredibly unique, and then to work with him and have him as vulnerable and open to the dialogue and open to the collaboration as an actor and as a creative, that is the best possible way to work. And I can't grow unless someone else pushes me outside of my comfort zones. And that was what everybody involved felt like. We were constantly going, I dare you. And that's the best way.
There's a lot of ambiguity in the script, and it involves a lot of trust of the audience, which I think is really thrilling as an audience member. And I'm wondering, to maintain that kind of ambiguity and those kind of points where information is withheld and left, was there a lot of other stuff that you were shooting and then pulling back from, or was it very much kind of as scripted from the beginning?
We spent a lot of time trying to get that right in this script, where, I mean, it was quite a challenge, because it's like this serial killer genre, which is usually, that has so many aspects of like procedure and evidence, and it's usually from the detective's perspective. And if you do get a scene with someone in a relationship with someone that is, someone that's a kind of monster, it's usually for one scene. So it was almost inherent in the idea that we were going to veer away from that kind of, it's about that piece of evidence, or the knife was found at this place, and it was quite conscious on the script level to make it much more grounded emotionally from that person's emotional perspective. So that felt, we wanted to sort of, and even sort of revelations or not revelations, depending on how you read the ending, we, at some point during the development, we decided to take out some bits of more sort of cliched evidence of what, something physical, a prop that you would usually pin it on someone. And we thought maybe this could just be a conversation between two people at a cafe, and it's just based on that, and it's just about what they're feeling. And then in the edit, I think there was some kind of modulation of that, about maybe this was giving something too much away or not enough away. And we did talk in the shooting of like, how much should we show here? And then we sometimes got a spectrum of performances that we could kind of shift. But it was something that we were conscious about from the very beginning, to like, let's not make this too much about, it shouldn't be like a Cluedo. And you're invested in the lead character as much as the monster that might be lurking in the woods and who that could be.
Cool. Do we have any more questions? Yeah, just up there.
Hi. I was just wondering, because I think the character of Moll, she has this kind of grit and unpredictability and ruthlessness that's in her, as well as her kind of sense of goodness. And I wondered if there was a point at which you thought that the ending might be different.
It's going so far back now, probably because I wrote so many drafts of the script, like it's in the triple figures. There was definitely a conscious effort to try and create someone that you would have complex feelings towards. And I talked about this in Toronto when we premiered the film, where I'm so struck by how many anti-heroes we have in cinema, whether that's Travis Bickle or Daniel Plainview or Michael Corleone, people that we have really conflicted feelings about, and how few there are in cinema for female characters, how few anti-heroines there are, and the ones that we do have are usually based on books. It's like it's Carrie, or it's the girl with a dragon tattoo, or it's Gone Girl. And I always thought, why is that culturally? That's quite strange. Why are there so few that originated in cinema that we have this complex feelings towards? So there was that was just a private pet project through writing the script that then sort of passed on to Jessie and saying, that's what we're doing here. We need to create a complex relationship with the audience. They need to empathise with this character and understand her. And then the way we explained it when we were developing was that it's like you create an umbilical cord with the audience, and that identification should feel really connected from the beginning. And then we kind of want to stretch that relationship out almost to the point of it being severed. And that you start to question the character the more you go. So I can't think of it now, but there might have definitely been different versions of the script, but it was in terms of how the character ended up. Maybe in the very early stages, but then at some point we landed on this, where there was it felt natural that this fairy tale heroine had to somehow slay the dragon, but that you might have complex feelings about how that came about, and whether you think that's ultimately a good thing or a bad thing, or whether she crossed some kind of moral threshold. And just to leave that funny taste in the mouth of the audience, giving them something, but also retaining some ambiguity. I don't know if I answered your question well enough.
Cool. Do we have any more? Yeah, just down here.
Hi, I'd just like to say how much I enjoyed the film. Congratulations on your first feature. I've got two questions, if that's okay. My first question is about the music of the film, which I really loved. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about how that came about and the decisions involved in choosing the music for the film. And my second question is, what is the future for the film now? Where will it go from here?
Shall I do the first one, you do the second? So the composer's Jim Williams, I really liked his work on Ben Wheatley's films, and there was something quite minimal about his instrumentation, but you actually got a lot from the flavour that he was giving you. And I knew that we wanted to be kind of bold about the music and not do... There was a kind of temptation of a first feature to be very, very discreet. And I thought, you know what, we can really go for it in places. And then the journey that we went on was actually one of trying to, as much as possible, root the music in her emotional point of view. And any time that we kind of did more of a genre soundtrack, it didn't feel right, because we were, as the audience, you were one step ahead of the character. There was like ominous music playing before you met that character or before she went round that corner. And I thought it worked, and we started to realise it always worked much more effectively when we were under her skin. And so the conversation with Jim was, we need to write this score as if it's coming from within the guts of this character. So what is she feeling that might be different from the face that she's presenting to these people, but that is kind of simmering and bubbling under the surface? How do we evoke that kind of tension? And not the tension of something bad might happen, the tension inside the character. And that became like our kind of mantra with every scene, where we were just like, what's going on inside that person's skin that she might not even be aware of? And how do we create sounds or a texture or a landscape where it's going to get to the guts of it and be within her skin? And then it seemed to sort of click together. And then it kind of all started to make sense, and we could be bold or discreet as long as we adhered to that rule. Johnny's just walked into the room. Come down. Woo! Yo. Sorry.
All right.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'll do that really quickly because we should get Johnny to say something. He's come all the way. We have got a brilliant distributor who's going to be getting the film out there probably spring next year, and before that we're going to be doing some festivals around the UK. So obviously this is a British film. We're not going to have the money that Guardians of the Galaxy 18 do. So if you like it, please tell your friends and build up a head of steam for us.
Johnny, okay, so I know that you haven't actually necessarily seen the film yet, but in terms of performing in the film, your role is very much you kind of veer. There's people who are kind of against you, but there's suspicion all around you, but you're kind of holding this secret, but then you're also very charming. I'm wondering how you kind of modulated kind of throughout the production process, kind of knowing the information that you were kind of withholding or you wanted the audience to see.
Well, it was really important for me to honour the brilliant character that Michael had drawn, and he was somebody who had absolute conviction in what he was doing, and a belief. I wouldn't like to call him. I think it's a film that allows the audience to make their mind up about who or what these people are, and I think he thinks he's right in whatever he's doing, and he if you were to analyze him, you might you might use words like psychopath and these things, but I don't think he's ever invited that kind of speculation on himself. And actually, I like the fact that it might not be him by the end, and it seemed really important to play each moment that he was in with conviction, and each belief he had in each moment, even if it changed in the next scene, with utter conviction, and to to believe in the things that were important in that sort of second, and that millisecond, and play them with that conviction. So yeah, I don't know. I think the twists and turns of what is brilliant in the writing, and how things are kind of left a bit open at the end. That was all. I just tried to kind of do it with belief, really, and the writing kind of leads you on a journey that's really beautiful, I think. So.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Is there a raised hand up at the back in the corner over there? Do we have a mic? Do you want to shout it and I'll repeat it? Okay, oh no, there's a mic.
First of all, congratulations on a brilliant film. Just one question. So it appears that Moll suspects Pascal's guilt from the outset, and you can obviously see that throughout the film. She chooses to ignore that and continue the relationship with him. And then we see her confronting him and then admitting that she had stabbed the girl out of revenge, or with the aim of killing her. So I guess from my perspective, what flipped her switch? So why kill him at that point? Was that her form of revenge against Pascal for lying to her? Was this just her sort of, I guess, evil coming out because she can't help herself? Or was this sort of her way of killing him because she thought no justice would be done if she just left it and relied on, I guess, the police? Or
it's always very dangerous ground to ask a director to explain the ending of the film, because usually we're going to say, well, that's a really interesting interpretation. I'm going to, leave it open, and I'm somewhat tempted to do that. Just like, I'll comment on it in a second, but you're saying that she believed it was him from the outset. I'm not sure that everyone in the audience, I'm not going to ask everyone now because I could be contradicted, but I'm not sure that everyone's going to think that. I've definitely met some other people that didn't think that that she suspected him, and that it was actually a film about someone that was standing by their partner who they believed in, who they thought was unjustly sort of being attacked by a community that had it out against her and against him. And that when, just to complicate it even further, when she admits to him at the bar that she tried to stab someone to kill him, that might not necessarily have been completely true. That might have been a ruse to elicit the truth from him. There's a question mark around that. And then, just to complicate it even further, at the very end, well, actually, just to give you a bit of an answer and not be too slippery about it, at the very end, when she kills him, in some ways, there's I don't know what her other option is, in so much as there is no evidence. So if she walks away from that relationship or him, there's still the monster lurking in the woods. If you think the monster is Pascal, it might not be. But there could still be the monster lurking in the woods. And so there is a kind of, I don't know, in some ways it felt necessary to put the character at that precipice where there was an inevitability about whether she slayed the dragon, because I don't know what she would do if she goes to the police and says, oh, he told me at a cafe that he murdered these people. I don't know if that's going to stand up in court. So there is, I mean, I know the film goes into some sort of slightly fantasy realm at that point, and it veers off into something that is a bit more fairy tale or mythical. But in the writing and in the making, I thought, you know what, it's necessary to create this space where there's an empty road and there's smoke and it feels slightly separate to reality. And the character has to make some kind of choice between staying with this guy who is the big bad wolf and all that entails, or separating herself from him, but she might have to do that through violent means. So I answered 1 out of 3 of your questions.
And Jessie, actually, maybe I wanted to ask you, because there's that amazing scene where she lies down in the dirt and actually kind of experiences or puts herself in the place of what it would be like to lie there in the woods with the dirt in her mouth. And I'm wondering if you felt that there was a kind of transformation that took us to the end in her character, if there was a kind of, I hate to use the words growth or journey, but you know, if there was a turning point that you saw in Moll at that point. Definitely she goes on a massive journey throughout the whole film. And I think the thing about, for me, the story is about the moral compass of when I was working before, of the moral compass of what we're told is right and wrong from the get-go of, you know, you're good, don't swear, if that's a bad thing to do. Why? I was brought up in Ireland, so we were told, we were bred on swears. But stupid thing to say. Anyways. God. But I think the minute the kind of, this guy has given her back her life. She's been numb from the age of 13 to 27 when you meet her at the beginning of the film, because she's been trying to atone a crime that she committed and that she has been told since then she is a bad, evil person that must be quenched. And then she meets this man who lances love back into her and lances life back into her. And how can this man do harm to somebody, and how can I do harm to somebody? And the questions that poses to her throughout the murder case and throughout experiencing that level of love and that level of life can only transform a person. And that scene in the grave is, in a way, she is so pushed to the parameter of life in every single colour that involves, that she wants to almost be as close to death as possible and experience what that woman experienced in order to get some clarity of life. So I don't know what I just said, but yeah.
Just to qualify on the question that was asked before, by the way, that wasn't I think your interpretation of it is really legitimate as well. It wasn't no, you didn't get it. Actually what happened, But I was just qualifying it of like you do get another interpretation, but.
Well, it's a film that everyone will be talking about in the lobby as to their own interpretations. It's a fantastic film and we're delighted to have it in the festival. The film will be released by Altitude in the spring next year, so do tell your friends. Thank you for being an engaged audience and please join me in thanking the filmmakers.
Thank you.